Late 1967, you're face down in the red dirt of the Central Highlands, hugging a splintered tree stump while AK rounds snap overhead. The platoon sergeant is on the radio, shouting over the gunfire. Dustoff, Dustoff, this is Bravo 26, urgent wounded, LZ is hot. Beside you, a kid from Iowa is bleeding through a field dressing. The nearest road is miles away. Jungle on every side. If nobody reaches him, he's not going home. Then you hear it. A distant thump builds into a roar as if one Huey drops out of the clouds. Nose high, red crosses on the doors. Door gunners rake the tree line while the ship sinks into a storm of dust and tracer. A medic jumps before the skids even touch. In that moment, under that beating rotor, you understand. In Vietnam, helicopters aren't just machines. They're the thin line between living through this or becoming another name on the wall. Vietnam wasn't just a jungle war. It was the first true helicopter war. Mountains, rice paddies, and triple canopy jungle turned roads into ambush corridors. Guerrillas could mine every route, but a helicopter could drop into a tiny clearing, grab the wounded, and climb straight out. U.S. Army medical histories later calculated that helicopter ambulances moved almost 900,000 U.S. and Allied sick and wounded between 1962 and 1973, flying nearly 500,000 missions. Because of fast air evacuation and new trauma care, roughly 97 to 98% of the men who reached a field hospital alive survived, far better odds than in World War II or Korea. What most people don't realize is that behind those numbers were just a few key helicopters, flown by small crews who made it their job to go wherever you were bleeding, lost or surrounded, and refused to leave you there. You feel the Huey shudder as rounds hit the airframe, but the pilots keep it in the zone long enough for the crew to drag your friend aboard. Inside there's barely space. 2 pilots, a crew chief on the door gun, a medic kneeling in a jumble of bandages for bottles and blood. The call sign Dustoff goes back to the first dedicated aeromedical unit in Vietnam, the 57th Medical Detachment, helicopter ambulance, which arrived in 1962 with brand new UH-1s. Their standing order was brutal and simple. Launch in minutes, fly in almost any weather, land under fire, and take the wounded out. The environment rarely changes. Heat shimmering over rice paddies, tiny jungle clearings, smoke, rotor wash, and small arms fire chewing through thin aluminum. In 1964, Dustoff pilot Major Charles Kelly was warned not to land in a hot LZ. When told it was too dangerous, he reportedly replied, "When I have your wounded," and flew in anyway. He was killed moments later, but his words became a creed for medevac crews. From 1962 to 1972, helicopter ambulances in Vietnam flew roughly 496,000 missions and evacuated more than 900,000 people. Because helicopters could often get you to surgery within an hour, only about 2 to 3% of those who reached a field hospital alive died of their wounds. What most people don't realize is how that changed you. You fought knowing that if you could just keep breathing until the Huey appeared, your odds suddenly swung in your favor, and commanders knew they could send you deeper into the jungle, trusting Dustoff to pull you back out. Once helicopters proved they could save men after contact, the same airframes started reshaping how you went into battle in the first place. 2 years earlier, in November 1965, you'd learned what airmobile really meant. You remember standing in the dust near Pleiku as a line of UH-1 slicks from the 1st Cavalry Division, airmobile, settled in, rotors overlapping, each bird crammed with infantry from the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry. Minutes later, you were skimming treetops toward the Ia Drang Valley, heading for landing zone X-ray in what became the first large-scale helicopter air assault of the war. The Huey was the workhorse of that doctrine. In Vietnam, more than 7,000 UH-1s served in theater, and over 3,300 were lost, a staggering attrition rate. Slicks, troop carriers stripped of rocket pods, hauled 8 to 10 fully equipped soldiers at a time, with door gunners firing as you jumped off the skids into elephant grass. Veterans' oral histories describe hot landing zones the same way. The ship flaring hard, bullets punching through the skin, pilots shouting corrections while gunners fired into muzzle flashes at the edge of the clearing. At places like Ia Drang in 1965 and APBA Mountain, Hamburger Hill, in 1969, those helicopters were often the only reason isolated platoons weren't simply cut off and destroyed. Psychologically, the Huey made the war feel both more dangerous and more survivable. You could be dropped from relative safety into a lethal fight in seconds, but you also knew that if the perimeter held, slicks might claw their way back through fire to yank you out. Still, there were times when a single Huey load wasn't enough, when entire fire bases had to be built, supplied, or emptied under fire. That's when you learned the sound of a different rotor beat. Early 1968, you're dug in on a remote fire base in northern I Corps, the monsoon ceiling hanging low. The guns have been firing for days in support of Marines near Key San. The ammo stacks are shrinking. The aid station is full. Then a 47 Chinook appears out of the clouds, twin rotors scissoring the mist, the big helicopter almost hovering over the hilltop. The Chinook was the Army's heavy-lift workhorse in Vietnam. By February 1966, 161 had been delivered, including a Chinook battalion with the 1st Cavalry Division and the 147th Aviation Company supporting the 1st Infantry Division. Capable of lifting around 10,000 pounds of cargo or roughly 30-plus troops, or a cabin packed with litters, it could move what no other helicopter could. In the Central Highlands and around Key San, Chinooks placed artillery batteries onto isolated ridges and kept them supplied with thousands of rounds of ammunition, letting those guns shield infantry and outposts that would otherwise have been overrun. During the Tet Offensive of 1968, Army Medical Histories describes Age 47 shuttling patients between crowded hospitals and casualty staging areas, clearing room for fresh waves of wounded. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. Heavy-lift helicopters didn't just save the badly hit. They let commanders move whole units away from disaster. A fire base that seemed doomed could be emptied in a series of deafening, risky sorties. A battalion that might have been wiped out on a retreating convoy could instead be lifted out from a mountaintop. But some men weren't anywhere near a fire base when everything went wrong. They were alone, a jet crew deep in Laos, a recon team in the A Shao Valley, a tiny scout helicopter nosing along a jungle trail. For them, salvation came from a different breed of helicopter. You're riding in a Huey near the Laotian border in 1971 when the pilot nods toward a huge, olive-green helicopter sliding past at higher altitude, an Air Force A-3E Jolly Green Giant, refueling probe jutting forward, heading north with a crew of pararescuemen. The Jolly Greens and their larger H-853 Super Jolly cousins were built for one mission: combat search and rescue. Operating from bases in Thailand and Vietnam, they pushed deep into North Vietnam and Laos to pull out downed airmen and special forces teams. An official Air Force history credits these CSAR forces in Southeast Asia with saving 4,120 people, including 2,780 in combat situations, at the cost of 71 rescuers and 45 aircraft. Crews talk about coming home with dozens of bullet holes in the airframe and still landing with their rescued pilot alive, like the HH-3E that returned as Jolly Green 22 with 68 holes punched through the helicopter. Their motto, "That others may live," wasn't a slogan, it was how they flew. While the Jolly Greens went after men already down, other crews spent their tours trying to keep you from being ambushed in the first place. From 1967 onward, Hueys UH-6 Loach Scout helicopters and UH-1 Cobra gunships flew in hunter-killer teams, the Loach low and slow, deliberately trolling for enemy fire, the Cobra higher, ready to hammer any muzzle flash with rockets and cannon. In countless patrol areas with the 1st Cavalry and 101st Airborne, these teams found and broke up enemy positions before your company walked into them. The price was terrible. Army records indicate that well over half of all UH-6 built for Vietnam were eventually lost, most to ground fire. But every ambush they forced to open fire on a helicopter instead of a platoon on the trail meant lives saved on the ground. Psychologically, knowing that someone would come for you, whether it was a Dustoff Huey, a Chinook, a Jolly Green, or a fragile little Loach with a Cobra riding shotgun, changed how you faced each patrol. Tactically, that promise drove the United States to mount huge rescue efforts like the 1972 Bat-21 operation, and to accept heavy losses to keep that unwritten contract with its troops. By the time your tour ends, the sounds of Vietnam are burned into your memory. The fast wop-wop of a Huey, the deeper thunder of a Chinook, the distant growl of a Cobra rolling in, the heavy chop of a Jolly Green pushing north. Helicopters turned Vietnam into a war where distance and terrain mattered less than minutes. Dustoff Hueys dragged the mortally wounded off jungle floors and rice paddies. Slick Hueys flung entire battalions into battle and yanked shattered platoons out again. Chinooks built and emptied fire bases that no truck could ever reach. Jolly Greens and tiny scout ships prowled the borders, risking everything to rescue aircrew and patrols who otherwise had no chance at all. The price was savage. Of roughly 12,000 U.S. helicopters that serve in Vietnam, more than 5,000 were lost, and thousands of pilots, medics, crew chiefs, and gunners never came home. But their work meant that the ratio of killed to wounded dropped, and that a soldier who was still breathing when the helicopter arrived almost always lived to see another sunrise. So when veterans say they can still hear the rotors years later, it isn't just memory. It's the sound of strangers and fragile machines choosing to fly toward their trouble instead of away from it, and in doing so, giving hundreds of thousands of American soldiers a second chance at life.